Is freeze drying really all that it's cracked up to be? We're going to show you 5 ways to preserve your food.
Hey, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Kylene, and we are the Provident Preppers. We are thrilled because September is the month of preparedness, and Suttons Daze invited us to participate again in 30 days of collaboration, where every day for the month of September, you'll get a new video from one of our great fellow prepper YouTubers to help teach us all how to be a little bit better prepared for the challenges that lie in our future.
And what a great thing this is. An opportunity for all of us to learn from each other and to do better and be better. And speaking of this, look at our bounty. Look at what we've been producing in our garden. Our orchards and our gardens are just going crazy. There is so much food. And you say, what do you do with all of it? Well, of course, we preserve a lot of it and have it for future use. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that we've done that. In the past, we've done bottling, we've done freezing, we've done dehydrating, we use cold storage methods, and this year we've added freeze drying, and we are so excited. This has been a fun journey, and we're going to tell you about that.
So in this video, we are going to review the 5 different methods that we use, some of the advantages and the disadvantages to each of them. Now, saying that, quite frankly, I will tell you that there is no one perfect method, and it depends on your personal preference and your budget, which method is right for you and your family. But being able to preserve some of your garden bounty so that you can eat it throughout the year, and maybe if your garden fails the next year or you don't have such an abundant crop, it is really important, because the more nutrition that this garden bounty provides to you, the healthier we'll all be. So let's get started.
The first method we're going to talk about is freezing. Freezing is a very popular method for preserving all kinds of things, from cuts of meat to berries and all kinds of good things. My favorite, strawberry freezer jam. Nothing beats strawberry freezer jam or raspberry freezer jam.
So he's so funny with the freezer jam. It's just funny to hear him say that, because we make all kinds of other jams and preserves too in bottles, but he's definitely a freezer jam kind of guy. Now, there are some advantages to freezing foods. One is that it's incredibly easy. So like, this is some of my chicken broth that I make, and I just pour it into these containers when it's done and put the lid on it, stick it in the freezer, and I label it. How easy is that, right? Now, I've also had great success freeze drying this, and I know there's a lot of people who will bottle it and pressure can it so that it's shelf stable. One of the other things is that, like these, we've just done a whole bunch of peaches. And what I've done is actually, I've taken my pie pan and I poured the peach filling in here. And this isn't how I leave them in the freezer. I will put these in some gallon Ziploc freezer bags. But now when it's time for me to make a pie, I'll just make the pie crust and unwrap this and stick it right in there. And it makes having a fresh peach pie so easy, and we just bake it in that. So there's a lot of good things that makes it really easy. Now, some of the things that's frustrating with it is that it'll get freezer burn on it, right? Another disadvantage is that you have to have electricity. If the power goes out, you could lose all of this. So it's really important that you have some foods that are shelf stable, and in case the power does go out, how are you going to preserve this? So this is really interesting. It looks kind of gross, but there's a whole bunch of small Ziploc bags in here that are filled with eggs. And then it's in this big gallon Ziploc bag. So this is one of the ways that we can preserve our eggs when we have too many from our hens, so that we can use them later. I do prefer freeze-dried eggs, but freezing will also do a good job.
The second method we're going to talk about is bottling, and we absolutely love bottling. We do a lot of jars of food every year.
And they look beautiful on the shelves. Okay, that is one of my favorite. It's like a little trophy piece when I have all of these beautiful bottles lined up. And then all throughout the winter, we're able to go and eat this delicious garden bounty. So I absolutely love it.
Yep. It's a fairly straightforward method. There's a lot of good information online. So this is something that almost everyone can do.
But some of the disadvantages are, if you do it wrong, you can kill your family. And you'll find lots of people that are telling you not that the guidelines aren't important. Botulism is a real danger, and it is very important. So for instance, carrots and hamburger, you have to pressure can these. You cannot water bath them. And some people will tell you that it's safe to bottle milk products, but it's not proven safe. And so for our family, I'm not risking anything. Another disadvantage is that you have to have lids, and lids are seriously like gold. Like, we debated whether or not we should put this on the channel, because this is like worth its weight in gold, and now everybody knows that we have some canning lids. But one of the reasons why we have so many and so many different kinds is because we're in the process of doing a video on rating some of these lids. And I have never had a lid buckle before. And you can see this lid, how it has buckled. This has never happened to me. And suddenly we had all kinds of jars where the lids buckled, and it was really frustrating because normally we just don't have any issues with that. So you cannot bottle if you do not have the lids. So being a good prepper, you need to store the lids. Shelf life, it's an advantage that they're shelf stable, but it's a disadvantage that, like on these new boxes, they now say up to 18 months. We store them longer than that. It's good to rotate through them as quickly as you can, but as long as they're stored in a cool, dry place, we're still getting 5 years or so. But the new lids that they have, I'm really concerned that maybe we're not going to get as long. I don't know. But there are so many wonderful things about bottling. It's a tried and true method. You do have to have an initial investment in a lot of the tools, like the canner and the pressure canner and all the bottles. You know, it's an expensive thing to start up, but once you invest in the bottles, you can use them many times before they usually break. So overall, I think bottling is a great way to preserve some of your food.
The third method we're going to discuss is dehydrating or drying. And this has obviously been around for hundreds or thousands of years. People have preserved food that way. Things like fruit leather, tremendous, just yummy stuff.
Delicious.
Raisins, peaches, all kinds of things that you can dehydrate or dry, and it does a great job. And it's really fairly straightforward. You do need a little bit of equipment, but even that can be very inexpensive. We made a solar dryer for about $100, and it does a great job. There's electric dryers on the market. You can even use an old car. We had an old van
The
that she
dehydrator
used to
van.
put all kinds of racks of food in, and it did an amazing job until she decided she wanted to paint the windows black, and then I said,
To make
we're
it more
getting rid of it.
efficient.
So anyway, we have other methods now.
Okay, so when we're talking about dehydrating or drying, it's kind of important to understand a few of the basics. And like he said, some food you just can't make any other way. Like the fruit leather, this you've got to have a dehydrator to be able to make it, or you can do it in the oven. You can use an oven method. These are some raisins from this year that we made in the solar dehydrator, and they are just delicious, and you can't use any other method and get the raisins. So one of the things, so these are dehydrated peaches, and we did these in our dehydrator, but they taste good. You can chew on them, but they're nowhere near as good as the freeze-dried peaches. If you're testing them side by side, these will not, they'll reconstitute, but they don't reconstitute to their former taste and texture. These are great to put in something like oatmeal or something like that, or just to snack on. But the freeze-dried ones, I think, truly are better. Now let's talk for just a minute about safety, because that is one of the concerns with dried food.
Absolutely.
In order to store them for longer term, like with an oxygen absorber, they have to be dry enough to snap inside and out, because otherwise you run the risk of growing botulism and hurting your family. So you've got to be careful. There's no problem with this kale. This is nice and crunchy. In fact, I crunched it down to put it in this jar. So that's just fine. And same thing with the spinach. These are dried poblano peppers, and they are dry enough that they will snap. So we don't have to worry about those. I would never put an oxygen absorber in with raisins because raisins don't snap, right? So definitely some pros to being able to dehydrate. I love our solar dehydrator. You can also make jerky and things like that in a dehydrator, but you cannot do it in our solar dehydrator because think about it, the sun shines during the day and it heats up, but the temperature falls at night when the sun goes down. And so that creates the perfect opportunity for bacteria to start to grow and to ruin your meat. So yes, absolutely, in an electric dehydrator you can do meat, but you can't do it safely in a solar dehydrator.
Exactly right. So make sure you know what you're doing. Your county extension office is a great resource. Also books like this one by Carol Kanzler. There's good resources out there. Make sure you get these resources and use them to make sure you do it right.
But don't be afraid. We're not trying to scare you, right?
No.
Because as long as you have information and good information, you can do this. We do it all the time.
Yes. Method number 4 is actually one of my favorites. It's cold storage. Things like root cellaring and actually storing vegetables in the ground. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but some of these just lend themselves so perfectly to being in a root cellar. They'll last for months. We have potatoes in our root cellar that go from October clear through the end of April. We're keeping them that long and it just does an amazing job. We have things like carrots and beets that we actually leave in the ground and mulch over them and then pull back that mulch and harvest them all through the winter and the spring.
And those carrots are so sweet.
They get so much sweeter and better.
Sweet.
So there's some really cool things that you can do with very, very little expense.
Now, one of the advantages to cold storage is that it takes very little work. For the most part, the expense comes when you create whatever place you're going to store it in. And like us, we're pretty budget conscious about it. And so we buried a freezer, and that's how we store our potatoes every year. And if you click the card in the corner, I'll take you to a link where you can learn more about that. But some of the vegetables do have to be prepared. Like for this butternut squash, we would want to wash it with a mild soap and water solution and then just put a thin layer of oil on it, just super, super thin, but that will help. It takes any of the bacteria off of it to start, and then it will extend the shelf life. And there's a few things you need to know, like don't store apples with other things because the apples will emit a gas and it makes everything ripen quicker. But you can literally store things for months. One of the advantages is that this butternut squash will taste the same. It'll have the same taste and the same texture in 4 months downstairs in a root cellar than it will the day that I put it in, right? And so you've got a lot of that. Now things will soften as they age, but you really have a nice long shelf life. The carrots get better in the ground.
They do.
And this is one of the least expensive ways to do it. Now, I've always dreamt of having a real root cellar, but so far it hasn't been in our budget, and maybe someday it will be. But for now, I'm still just making do with what I have.
And truly, if we had that root cellar, we wouldn't have experimented with all these other things.
It's true.
That have worked out so well, and we've been able to help so many people understand them.
And so there's another video that I would like you to see. I'll just leave a link to it in the card in the corner, and it's about different expedient or low-cost root cellars, so that there's all kinds of different ideas in that video, and that's a really good one to watch in case you're like me and you can't afford to dig a root cellar.
The fifth method we're going to talk about is freeze drying. We started doing this early this year and it has been phenomenal. We started out with the medium freeze dryer and my wife loved it so much that we ended up getting the large one as well, and they have both stayed very busy this year. The freeze drying method is one where you take the product down well below zero, and then as you heat that product back up, you put it under vacuum, which allows the water to sublimate, which means it goes from a solid state to a gas without going through the liquid phase, and that's really what freeze drying is. And speaking of that, we have a batch of meatballs in here. We're going to pull these out and take a look at them. So here they are. These were put in yesterday, and you can see they are now freeze dried and ready for long-term packaging.
So one of the things that I love about freeze drying is that packaging it is super easy. Now these are meatballs, so they were cooked originally and they have some fat. So the fat is going to limit the shelf life. You're not going to get a 25-year shelf life out of these, but each one of these trays, I'll just fill a bag with it. We'll put it in an oxygen absorber and then we'll seal it using this impulse sealer, and then it's shelf stable. Now with meat, once this package is opened, you have to refrigerate it. But other than that, it's going to be shelf stable for a pretty long time. Okay, so freeze drying is so much easier than you might think. However, it can be challenging for some people. If I ever have a problem and things don't work, John fixes it. If the oil needs to be changed, John changes it. And so for me, it is super simple. For you, if you don't have John to do all the work for you, you might have a little bit of an issue. We've had a few problems with the freeze dryer. One, we have them in the garage because we have a small home and there's no place in our home to actually put the freeze dryers. And so in the summertime when it's really hot, we just can't freeze dry it. And so that's been a little bit challenging, but John's kind of works through a lot of that for me. Yeah. But I want to show you the difference. For me, freeze drying is by far the easiest method. So let's go back to the peaches because we just recently did a whole bunch of peaches. Now, these are peaches that I bought a box of seconds. It was a 3/4 bushel and it was only $15, so it's a killer deal. When I freeze dried them, I left the skin on. So it was super easy. I just washed the peaches and sliced them up, put them on the tray, put them in the freezer, and then put them in the freeze dryer. They absolutely look gorgeous. The nutritional value in freeze-dried food is significantly more because the nutrients aren't killed during the process. Now, these are those same peaches that are bottled. Okay, these are absolutely delicious, and I wouldn't just want freeze-dried peaches because we love home bottled peaches. They're amazing, but there's a lot of work that goes into putting these in the bottle because the first thing that we have to do is we have to scald them in the hot water and cool them. Then I have to peel them all, put them in the jars, and most of the time we'll either use honey or a little bit of sugar. Since Ben likes honey, we usually do the honey. So these are actually just preserved with honey. And then my job is over because Jonathan is the one that has to process them. And peaches in our area process in a water bath canner for 40 minutes. So when you are bottling a lot of peaches and you can only put 7 in a canner at a time, that's really time consuming. And
that 40 minutes starts after you get it up to boiling. So it's usually more like an hour per batch. So it is a little time intensive.
Right. And with this, the peaches have to be done right when they're ripe. With this, as soon as they're ripe, I can put them in the freezer and then they can wait their turn to go in the freeze dryer, and it doesn't matter if it takes a little while. Now with these are our homegrown peaches and they were really small this year. And so these are a little bit uglier than these because what happened was we were trying to bottle all these peaches and we'd already scalded a bunch and we ran out of time because we couldn't wait to process them all that time. And so these look a little bit ugly because they're skinned and they were scalded, so they're a little bit brown, but they are actually really, really delicious. So that's the difference in them. I like to leave the skin on just for the nutritional value. But a lot of times, because we don't have enough bottles for all of our freeze-dried stuff, we will put our freeze-dried foods in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber. Now, the bottles you can reuse I never reuse the lids with a wet pack, but I totally, if I've dry packed it, I'll reuse those lids. Now you can reuse the Mylar bags. When you cut this top off, you can wash it out really well and let it completely dry and then reseal it. Put new food in it and reseal it. And every time the bag's gonna get a little bit smaller, but you can reuse it for a while. So that's really good. One of the other things I wanted to show you, because that was the peaches. These are yellow raspberries that we grow in. They are so sweet, but this is just bottled and it's super easy to bottle them because all you do is put them in a jar, fill it with water. I don't usually put sugar on these at all. I just water bath them in the water. But then these are freeze dried, and I wash them. I just put them on the tray, put them in the freeze dryer. There's an oxygen absorber in here, right? That's how we preserve it, and it sucks this lid down and keeps us nice and fresh. This has like a 25-year shelf life because it doesn't have any fat. I need to protect this from light. Now this, because it's in the bag, these are the same yellow raspberries, I have to protect them from rodents because this bag is at risk for rodents, but it's not at risk for light. It needs to be stored in a cool place. But I have become a huge fan of freeze drying things because it's such an incredible snack food, because instead of having like unhealthy chips or things like that, you can snack literally on fruits and vegetables, and they are so good. One of the things we did this year that was really yummy is we cut cherry tomatoes in half, sprinkled them with a little bit of seasoned salt, and freeze dried them, and they're just
Very tasty.
really, really good. So the disadvantages to freeze drying, one is the startup cost. It costs a lot of money to invest in a freeze dryer. And that's one of the reasons why we have 2 of them, so that we can help some of our friends and neighbors that maybe can't meet that big expense. So we let them come and do some of their food at our place, and in exchange for they pay for the electricity and things. But it really works well for us. But that startup cost can be pretty painful. And another disadvantage is that the freeze dryer is a machine, and sometimes it breaks, and sometimes you have to figure out what's going on with it. Like the hot garage, sometimes it just doesn't always work just like you would like it to. So you have to have a Johnny to take care of that. But I will leave a link in the description of the video to Harvest Right, which is where we bought our freeze dryers. But they've been really good with customer service, and until you taste the freeze-dried food that you do at home, you just can't imagine. And some people talk about, well, I would rather just buy it already freeze-dried, which is great if that's what you want to do. It is expensive, but you don't have to pay for the machine, so it kind of works out. But I can guarantee you're never going to get yellow raspberries or freeze-dried meatballs or some of the really cool things that we can do because we have it. But that being said, I am old. And I've fed a lot of people, and I've preserved an awful lot of food. And this is the first year I had the freeze dryer, and we've survived just fine.
It's actually been pretty wonderful. And there are a couple of things that people often think about or they've heard about with the freeze dryer. And one is the oil changes. We actually got the Premier pump, which means you only have to change the oil about every 25 batches. And oil changes are actually very easy. It's a matter of turning a valve, collecting that oil, filtering the oil, putting in new oil or the refiltered oil. It's about a 5 or maybe a 10-minute process. The other thing that I'd heard was the power cost. And we have found the power cost to be very minimal. Most of our things that we've freeze dried take between about 15 and 20 cents worth of power. I mean, it's just really, we have a 10 cent per kilowatt hour rate.
So it's $1.50 to $2.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So it's really hasn't been bad at all.
No, it hasn't. And like when our friends come over to freeze dry, he always measures it, and it's kind of amazing. It's like, it cost me $1 to freeze dry all this food. Now, if your cost per kilowatt is more expensive, that changes everything, and you really have to look at that.
Yeah.
Ours is pretty cheap.
But the real bottom line here is that the things that we need to do to become more self-reliant and more resilient, one of those is to grow a garden, and one of those is to know how to preserve that food. If you can grow some of your own food, you have just become so much more self-reliant. If you can preserve that food to last through the winter or longer, then you are on your way to becoming more self-reliant, more resilient, and having the peace of mind that goes along with all that.
Now, one of the things that is a little bit of a disadvantage with the freeze drying, depending on your storage space, is that these are dehydrated peaches, and quite frankly, they don't taste as good, but there are so many more dehydrated peaches in this bottle than there are freeze-dried peaches in this bottle. There's probably 3 times the amount of peaches here than there is here. This does have a longer shelf life because about a 25-year, right? This we've got a little bit, maybe 5. So there is a big difference, but both of them will keep your family fed.
Absolutely. And the critical thing that we want all of you to understand is the importance of becoming self-reliant and resilient. And you do that by learning to grow some of your own food. If you're growing some of your own food, you just became so much better off. And the next step is learning how to preserve that food. This may sound complicated, but it really isn't. The gardening piece isn't that complicated, and the preserving piece isn't. It's just a little bit of a learning curve, and you master that very quickly.
I think you downplay it. I think it took me a while to figure out how to garden well.
Well, that is true.
It did.
But if you start and have success, you just seem to get there.
Yeah.
And it's a step-by-step process.
So start now.
Absolutely. We encourage you to do that, starting as soon as you can. And now for the question of the day. What is your favorite method for preserving your harvest?
All right, we want to encourage you to check out tomorrow's video on Suttons Daze, because it's going to be Morgan from Rogue Preparedness, and she is awesome. And she is going to talk about 10 tips for living off-grid. It should be great.
Thanks for being part of the solution.